but McKelty and Tony are still hanging out with us.
I think that McKelty kind of sees that they're...
Welcome back to The Life with the Browns. Christine Brown's new husband walked into one of the most controversial reality television families, completely blind to the chaos that surrounded it. David Woolley had never watched an episode of Sister Wives before meeting Christine. He didn't know the emotional history between Christine and Kody Brown. He didn't understand the tension involving Robyn Brown, and he had absolutely no connection to the world of plural marriage that millions of viewers had spent years analyzing. That detail alone changes the entire dynamic of this story. While fans spent over a decade debating loyalty, betrayal, favoritism, and heartbreak inside the Brown family, David entered the picture as a complete outsider. He wasn't emotionally attached to the history. He wasn't trying to pick sides. He wasn't carrying years of resentment toward anyone involved. He simply met Christine as a woman rebuilding her life after years of emotional exhaustion. And now the cameras are capturing something no one expected. They are capturing a man sitting quietly beside his wife while she explains the emotional damage she carried for more than 20 years. The reason viewers are reacting so strongly to David isn't because he is loud or dramatic. It's because he isn't. In a television universe built around explosive confrontations, emotional confessions, and carefully managed narratives, David's silence feels almost shocking. The cameras repeatedly zoom in on his face while Christine talks about betrayal, loneliness, and the feeling of never truly being valued inside her marriage. He doesn't interrupt her. He doesn't redirect the conversation. He doesn't try to control the moment. He simply listens. And strangely enough, that listening has become more powerful than any speech delivered on this show in years. For longtime fans, this creates an emotional contrast that's impossible to ignore. People spent years watching Christine beg for emotional connection while Kody appeared distracted, defensive, or emotionally unavailable. Now viewers are watching another man sit beside her with patience and steadiness, and the difference feels almost painful. David isn't trying to rewrite history. He isn't trying to defend himself online. He isn't trying to convince viewers that he's the hero of the story. That authenticity is exactly why audiences are paying attention. The show accidentally created a comparison it never intended to make. On one side is a marriage filled with emotional confusion, competition, and imbalance. On the other side is a relationship built around calm attention and emotional presence. And the craziest part is that David never even intended to become part of this public conversation. He simply fell in love with Christine Brown, and by doing that, he inherited one of the most dissected family stories in reality television history. One of the most fascinating parts of Christine Brown's new chapter is the fact that David Woolley never came into this relationship with a fan's perspective. He didn't spend years watching Sister Wives and building opinions about who was right and who was wrong. He didn't have favorite wives, least favorite wives, or emotional investment in the collapse of the Brown family before Christine entered his life. That matters more than people realize because every single person connected to this show has spent years defending a position. Kody Brown constantly tries to explain why the family collapsed. Robyn Brown spends much of her screen time defending herself against accusations that she benefited from favoritism. Mary Brown often appears focused on proving she has moved on emotionally, while Janelle Brown presents herself as the practical and emotionally grounded one. Every adult in this story carries years of emotional baggage, unresolved resentment, and public scrutiny. David doesn't. And because he doesn't, viewers are seeing something incredibly rare on reality television, a person reacting honestly instead of strategically. When Christine explains painful memories from her marriage, David's face reveals genuine emotion because he's hearing many of these details the same way an ordinary husband would hear them. He isn't calculating how the audience will react. He isn't shaping a narrative for social media. He's simply processing the reality that the woman he loves spent 2 decades feeling emotionally neglected inside a relationship she once believed would fulfill her spiritually and emotionally. That raw reaction changes the emotional energy of every scene he appears in. Fans have become so used to the performative nature of reality TV that authenticity almost feels unfamiliar now. David's quiet presence exposes just how emotionally exhausted Christine became over the years. There's also something deeply symbolic about the fact that David chose Christine without knowing her television identity first. For years, Christine lived in a family structure where attention, affection, and validation often felt divided. In plural marriage, every relationship competes for emotional space, whether the participants admit it or not. Christine frequently spoke about feeling overlooked, ignored, or emotionally unimportant during the later years of her marriage to Kody. But David entered her life seeing only one woman, not one wife among several. That difference completely changes the emotional foundation of the relationship. Christine is no longer fighting for a place in someone's attention. She is the center of someone's attention for the first time in decades. And viewers can actually see that transformation happening on screen. Her laughter feels lighter. Her confidence feels more natural. Even the way she speaks about herself has changed. For years, she sounded like someone trying to convince herself she was happy. Now she sounds like someone who no longer has to pretend. That emotional shift may be the single biggest reason audiences have connected so strongly with Christine and David's relationship. Christine Brown's entire public image since leaving Kody Brown has been built around one powerful message. She escaped the chaos and finally found peace. That storyline became the emotional heartbeat of her post-divorce journey on Sister Wives. Fans watched her leave Arizona, reconnect with her children, rediscover her confidence, and eventually fall in love with David Woolley. For many viewers, Christine's transformation felt inspiring because it represented something bigger than reality television drama. It represented a woman finally choosing herself after spending years sacrificing her emotional needs inside a complicated family structure. But there's another layer to this story that makes everything far more complicated than it first appears. Christine's happiness is now deeply connected to the same television machine that documented her unhappiness for years. In order to continue building her brand, promoting her story, and remaining part of the show's narrative, she has to keep revisiting the very pain she claims to have moved beyond. Every season requires her to reopen old emotional wounds. Every confessional asks her to explain another painful memory. Every interview pushes her to revisit betrayal, heartbreak, rejection, and disappointment. In many ways, Christine's healing and her reality television career are now pulling her in opposite directions. The audience wants closure, but television thrives on conflict. The more healed Christine becomes, the harder it is for producers to create dramatic storylines around her emotional journey. That tension creates one of the most emotionally fascinating dynamics in the series today. And strangely enough, the person exposing that tension most clearly isn't Christine herself. It's David. Unlike Christine, David has no experience managing reality television emotions. He doesn't know how to carefully shape his reactions for a confessional interview. He doesn't instinctively perform for the camera because he never spent years living in front of one. That's why his reactions feel so honest. When Christine begins describing painful moments from her marriage or opens up about years of emotional neglect, viewers can literally watch David processing the information in real time. Sometimes he looks heartbroken. Sometimes he looks stunned. Sometimes he looks quietly protective of her. Those reaction shots have become some of the most emotionally authentic moments the show has aired in years because they are completely unfiltered. David isn't acting. He isn't building a public image. He's simply sitting there realizing how much pain the woman he loves carried for decades. That authenticity changes the emotional atmosphere of every scene they share together. It also creates a sharp contrast with the way many fans perceived Kody during the final years of the marriages. Viewers often felt that Kody approached emotional conversations defensively or strategically, as though he was always trying to protect his own narrative. David feels different because he doesn't appear interested in defending anything. He listens instead of performing. And in a show where nearly everyone seems desperate to explain themselves, that quiet steadiness has become one of the most powerful things audiences have seen in a very long time. One of the most explosive moments in Christine Brown's recent storyline came when she openly admitted that she never truly trusted Robyn Brown during the years they spent together as sister wives. That statement completely changed the way many longtime viewers interpreted the history of the Brown family. For years, audiences watched holiday gatherings, family meetings, emotional conversations, and public attempts at unity between the wives. The entire foundation of Sister Wives was built around the idea that plural marriage could function through teamwork, faith, sacrifice, and emotional cooperation. But when Christine admitted that she never really trusted Robyn at all, it suddenly forced viewers to reevaluate more than a decade of televised family interactions. If Christine was carrying distrust from the beginning, then many of the moments fans once interpreted as healing or sisterhood may have actually been emotional performances held together by obligation rather than genuine closeness. That revelation hit audiences hard because it suggested the emotional fractures inside the family were far deeper than anyone realized. But once again, the most revealing part of the entire scene wasn't Christine's statement itself. It was David Woolley's reaction to hearing it. He didn't interrupt her or question her feelings. He didn't try to soften the conversation or redirect the focus away from uncomfortable truths. He simply sat beside her and listened carefully while she unpacked years of emotional pain. That quiet reaction spoke volumes because viewers are so used to emotional defensiveness on this show. Fans spent years watching difficult conversations spiral into blame, arguments, or emotional shutdowns. David approached the moment differently. His silence didn't feel dismissive. It felt supportive. And that difference became impossible for audiences to ignore. Many viewers began comparing David's behavior to the way Kody Brown often handled emotional conflict throughout the later seasons of the series. Kody frequently appeared frustrated, impatient, or focused on protecting his own perspective whenever the wives expressed pain or disappointment. David's energy feels completely opposite. He doesn't appear interested in winning an argument or controlling the emotional narrative. He seems focused entirely on understanding Christine's experience. That distinction has become one of the defining emotional contrasts of the show's newer seasons. It also highlights something deeper about Christine's transformation after leaving plural marriage. For years, Christine existed in an environment where emotional attention felt divided and inconsistent. In a plural family, every relationship competes for emotional space, validation, and priority whether anyone admits it openly or not. Christine often appeared emotionally exhausted from trying to earn affection or reassurance. But with David, viewers are seeing a relationship where emotional attention feels direct, stable, and uncomplicated. That emotional simplicity may actually be what resonates most strongly with audiences. Fans aren't just reacting to romance. They're reacting to emotional safety. Christine looks like someone who no longer feels emotionally invisible, and David's calm presence reinforces that feeling every time the cameras focus on them together. In many ways, the show accidentally created its strongest argument against plural marriage simply by documenting what emotional stability looks like once Christine finally stepped outside of it. One of the biggest reasons David Woolley stands out so dramatically in the world of Sister Wives is because he feels completely disconnected from the performance culture that has consumed the Brown family for years. Almost everyone involved in the show now seems aware of the audience at all times. Every emotional conversation feels shaped by public perception. Every argument feels tied to years of online criticism, fan reactions, and social media narratives. After more than a decade on reality television, the cast members have become experts at managing how they appear on camera. You can often see them choosing words carefully, defending themselves before criticism even arrives, or subtly trying to guide the audience toward a certain interpretation of events. But David doesn't move like someone trained by reality television. He still reacts like a normal person who accidentally wandered into a television storm he never expected to join. That difference changes everything. When Christine Brown opens up emotionally, David doesn't seem focused on how the scene will play online or whether fans will agree with him. He reacts the way an ordinary husband would react while hearing painful truths about the woman he loves. That authenticity feels almost shocking in a franchise where emotional moments are often tangled with image management. Viewers have spent years watching Kody Brown explain the collapse of the family through long emotional speeches that often sounded defensive or carefully constructed. Fans frequently noticed how aware Kody appeared of the cameras during serious conversations. He often seemed less focused on emotional connection and more focused on controlling how the story would be interpreted. David creates the exact opposite energy. When he sits beside Christine, he looks fully present in the moment rather than fully aware of the production surrounding him. And because of that, audiences trust his reactions more. The contrast between these two men has quietly become one of the most important emotional dynamics in the newer seasons of the show. It's not just about romance. It's about emotional presence versus emotional performance. For years, Christine appeared trapped inside relationships where she constantly needed reassurance that she mattered. She often looked emotionally drained from trying to secure attention, affection, and acknowledgement inside a family structure where emotional priorities were constantly shifting. David's presence changes that entire emotional atmosphere. He doesn't appear distracted by competing relationships, divided loyalties, or family politics. His focus remains entirely on Christine, and viewers can visibly see the emotional difference that creates in her. She smiles differently now. She speaks with more confidence. Even her body language appears lighter and more relaxed than it did during the difficult middle years of the series. What makes this transformation so fascinating is that TLC likely never intended to create this comparison. The original purpose of Sister Wives was to present plural marriage as a loving and functional alternative family structure. But over time, the footage itself began telling a different story. The more viewers watched Christine with David, the more obvious it became how emotionally deprived she often seemed during her marriage to Kody. The show accidentally documented the emotional contrast between surviving in a complicated family system and finally feeling emotionally chosen by one person completely. And that accidental comparison may end up becoming the most lasting legacy of the entire series. The original promise of Sister Wives was built around a very specific idea that plural marriage created more love, more support, and more emotional fulfillment than a traditional relationship ever could. For years, viewers were told that having multiple wives meant having a larger emotional network, stronger family bonds, and a deeper sense of unity. The Brown family constantly described themselves as a team, a spiritual partnership built on sacrifice and shared purpose. The image TLC sold to audiences was simple but powerful. More people meant more love. More mothers meant more support for the children. More relationships meant more emotional connection. But over time, the reality viewers witnessed on screen started contradicting the message the show originally tried to promote. Instead of emotional abundance, audiences increasingly saw emotional competition. Instead of unity, they saw distance and resentment. Instead of balance, they saw favoritism and loneliness. And the most ironic part of all is that the clearest contradiction to the show's original thesis didn't come from critics or outsiders. It came directly from the footage TLC itself aired after Kody Brown left the family. Watching Christine with David Woolley has forced many fans to reconsider everything the series spent years trying to prove. Because somehow, the quiet scenes between one husband and one wife feel more emotionally connected than many of the scenes involving the entire plural family combined. Viewers see it in the small moments. They see it when David listens carefully while Christine talks about painful memories. They see it in the way he looks at her during conversations. They see it in the calm emotional energy between them. There's no competition for attention. There's no visible struggle for emotional priority. Christine no longer appears to be fighting for reassurance that she matters. For longtime fans, that emotional simplicity feels incredibly revealing. Many viewers have realized that Christine's calm moments with David contain more visible intimacy than entire seasons of the original family dynamic. And that realization changes the emotional meaning of the show itself. Suddenly, the idea that more spouses equals more love feels less convincing than ever. In fact, the footage seems to suggest the opposite. It suggests that emotional stability may come not from dividing love among many people, but from being fully emotionally present for one person consistently. That's what makes David such an unexpectedly powerful figure in this story. He never intended to challenge the core philosophy of plural marriage. He never entered the show trying to prove anyone wrong. But simply by existing naturally beside Christine, he exposed emotional gaps viewers had ignored for years. The contrast became even more noticeable whenever Kody Brown appeared on screen, discussing the collapse of the family. Kody often speaks about betrayal, loyalty, sacrifice, and respect, but audiences frequently feel emotional distance in his interactions. Meanwhile, David barely says anything dramatic at all, yet viewers consistently describe him as emotionally supportive and present. That difference says a lot about how audiences now interpret relationships inside the Brown family universe. The emotional center of the franchise quietly shifted away from plural marriage itself and toward Christine finally discovering what emotional security actually feels like after spending decades without it. One of the most overlooked parts of Christine Brown's journey is how completely the emotional balance of power shifted after she left the plural family. For years, Christine was often portrayed as the wife struggling the most emotionally inside the marriage. She openly admitted feeling lonely, neglected, and deeply hurt by the emotional distance growing between herself and Kody Brown. Viewers watched her repeatedly ask for affection, communication, and partnership while slowly realizing she was no longer receiving those things consistently. During many of the later seasons of Sister Wives, Christine seemed emotionally exhausted from fighting for a connection that no longer felt mutual. At the time, her decision to leave was framed as a massive rupture in the family. The show treated her departure almost like the collapse of an entire system. And in many ways, it was. But what nobody fully realized back then was how dramatically Christine's life would improve once she stepped outside that system entirely. Today, Christine appears emotionally stronger, financially independent, socially connected, and personally fulfilled in ways viewers rarely saw during her marriage. She has a close relationship with her children. She has strong support from Janelle Brown, whose friendship with Christine has become one of the healthiest relationships to survive the family collapse. And now she is David Woolley, a man whose calm and steady presence has completely changed the emotional atmosphere surrounding her life. What makes this transformation even more striking is the contrast with the situation left behind. The plural family structure that was once presented as spiritually strong and emotionally united has largely fallen apart. Christine left. Janelle separated from Kody. Mary Brown emotionally and legally distanced herself from the marriage. The once massive family unit fractured into separate lives, separate homes, and separate emotional realities. Meanwhile, Christine, the wife who many once viewed as emotionally vulnerable, suddenly appears to have the fullest and most emotionally stable life of anyone involved. That reversal completely changes the narrative of the show. For years, plural marriage was presented as something that offered women emotional security through family community and shared responsibility. But Christine's life after leaving suggests the opposite may have been true for her personally. She appears happier outside the system than she ever did inside it. And viewers can see that transformation every time she appears on screen with David. The emotional energy feels lighter, calmer, and more genuine. David doesn't seem interested in controlling Christine or shaping her identity. He simply supports her. And after years of watching Christine compete for emotional space inside a complicated family dynamic, audiences immediately notice the difference. That's why so many viewers connect emotionally with their relationship. It isn't just because fans enjoy seeing Christine happy. It's because her happiness quietly exposes how emotionally painful her previous life may have actually been. The cameras accidentally documented something far bigger than family drama. They documented a woman discovering what it feels like to finally be emotionally prioritized after spending decades feeling like an option instead of a certainty. There's something deeply symbolic about the fact that David Woolley entered Christine Brown's life without carrying any emotional loyalty to the mythology of the Brown family. For years, the world of Sister Wives revolved around protecting an idea. That idea was that plural marriage could succeed if everyone sacrificed enough, communicated enough, and remained spiritually committed enough. Even when the cracks became impossible to ignore, many members of the family still seemed emotionally invested in preserving the image of the lifestyle itself. Kody Brown especially spent years insisting the breakdown of the family came from disloyalty, lack of respect, or emotional betrayal from the wives rather than acknowledging deeper structural problems within the family dynamic. But David came into this story with no attachment to any of that ideology. He wasn't emotionally invested in defending plural marriage because he had never lived it. He wasn't trying to preserve the image of the family because he never helped build that image in the first place. All he saw was Christine standing in front of him as an individual woman with emotional scars she was still trying to process. That outsider perspective completely changed the emotional energy of the show. For perhaps the first time in years, Christine had someone in her life who wasn't asking her to sacrifice her emotional needs for the sake of maintaining a complicated family structure. David wasn't asking her to keep peace between sister wives. He wasn't asking her to suppress jealousy or disappointment for the sake of spiritual unity. He wasn't asking her to divide herself emotionally between competing relationships. He simply wanted a relationship with Christine herself. That simplicity became incredibly powerful for viewers because it highlighted how emotionally complex and draining Christine's previous life had become. Fans spent years watching her try to convince herself that partial emotional attention was enough. She often described feeling hurt whenever Kody prioritized other relationships, particularly his marriage with Robyn Brown. Over time, viewers watched Christine slowly realize she no longer wanted to compete for affection or validation inside a system built around divided emotional priorities. David's relationship with her feels like the exact opposite of that environment. There is no visible emotional competition surrounding their marriage. There's no constant negotiation for time, attention, or reassurance. And that emotional clarity has become one of the most compelling things audiences have seen in the entire franchise. What's even more fascinating is how unintentionally revealing the show has become because of David's presence. TLC likely expected Christine's post-divorce storyline to focus mainly on recovery, healing, and personal empowerment. Instead, the cameras ended up capturing something far more uncomfortable for the original premise of the series. They captured undeniable evidence that Christine appears emotionally healthier in a traditional monogamous relationship than she ever seemed inside plural marriage. That reality changes the emotional legacy of sister wives forever. Because no matter how the family tries to explain the collapse of the marriages, viewers can still see the contrast directly on screen. They can compare the tension, sadness, and emotional imbalance of the later plural family years with the calm emotional stability Christine appears to have now. And once audiences notice that contrast, it becomes impossible to unsee it. One of the most emotional truths hidden inside Christine Brown's story is that for years she was taught to believe that receiving only part of someone's love should still feel complete. Inside the world of plural marriage, every wife is expected to accept divided attention as normal. Time is shared. Emotional energy is shared. Affection is shared. Even major life moments are filtered through the reality that one husband belongs to multiple relationships at the same time. For a long time, Christine Brown convinced herself that this arrangement could still provide emotional fulfillment because that belief was deeply connected to her faith, her family structure, and the identity she built as part of the Brown family. She spent decades trying to make peace with being one piece of a larger emotional system. But over the years, viewers slowly watched her emotional confidence disappear. She often spoke about feeling invisible, unwanted, and emotionally neglected, especially during the later seasons of Sister Wives. The most heartbreaking part is that many fans could see the pain on her face long before she fully admitted it herself. There were scenes where she looked emotionally defeated simply sitting beside Kody Brown while he spoke about loyalty, obedience, and family structure. It felt less like a marriage and more like someone desperately trying to survive emotional rejection while pretending everything was spiritually meaningful. That's why her relationship with David Woolley resonates so deeply with audiences now. David didn't enter Christine's life seeing her as part of a complicated system. He saw her as the entire relationship. For perhaps the first time in her adult life, Christine became someone's only choice instead of one choice among several. And emotionally, that difference is enormous. Fans notice it every time Christine appears on screen smiling beside David. There's a level of emotional peace in her expression that viewers rarely saw during her plural marriage years. She no longer seems anxious about where she stands emotionally. She no longer appears worried about competing for attention or validation. Instead, she looks emotionally secure in a way that completely changes her entire presence on camera. What makes this even more powerful is the fact that David never tried to become a reality television character. He didn't enter the relationship seeking fame or attention. He wasn't trying to challenge Kody publicly or become part of online fan wars. He simply loved Christine in a straightforward and emotionally consistent way. Ironically, that normality became revolutionary inside the Sister Wives universe because audiences had spent so many years watching emotionally complicated and painful relationship dynamics unfold. David's quiet steadiness unintentionally exposed how emotionally unstable the Brown family structure had become long before Christine finally walked away. And perhaps that's the biggest reason viewers connect so strongly with this relationship. It doesn't feel like a performance. It feels like relief. After years of watching Christine settle for fragments of emotional connection, audiences are now witnessing her experience what it looks like to receive someone's full emotional attention without competition, without hierarchy, and without conditions attached to it. When people look back on Sister Wives years from now, the most unforgettable part of the story may not be the dramatic arguments, the family meetings, or even the collapse of the plural marriages themselves. It may actually be the quiet emotional contrast the cameras accidentally captured after Kody Brown left everything behind. The show originally began as an attempt to prove that plural marriage could create a bigger, richer, and more loving family experience than traditional relationships. For years, viewers were told that sacrifice, shared responsibility, and spiritual commitment would ultimately create stronger emotional bonds between everyone involved. But by the end of the story, the footage seemed to reveal something completely different. It revealed a woman who spent decades feeling emotionally incomplete finally discovering what emotional security looked like with one person fully focused on her. And the man at the center of that transformation, David Woolley, never even intended to become part of reality television history. He entered Christine's life with no understanding of the Brown family's public image, no emotional loyalty to the mythology surrounding plural marriage, and no desire to perform for cameras. Yet somehow, his quiet presence ended up exposing more truth about Christine's emotional journey than years of dramatic confessionals ever did. Viewers watched Kody Brown transform from someone who constantly questioned her value inside the family into someone who finally appeared emotionally secure. And that transformation fundamentally changed how many fans interpreted the entire series. Suddenly, the emotional center of the story wasn't plural marriage anymore. It was emotional attention. It was emotional consistency. It was the difference between being tolerated and being fully chosen. For years, Christine lived inside a system where love was divided by design. Every wife received only part of a husband's time, focus, and emotional energy. That arrangement required constant emotional compromise. But with David, there's no visible competition for affection, no emotional hierarchy, and no sense that Christine must earn reassurance or fight for priority. She simply exists inside a relationship where she is emotionally valued every day. That calm stability became more powerful to audiences than any dramatic storyline TLC ever produced intentionally. Even people who remain skeptical about reality television relationships admit there's something noticeably different about the emotional energy between Christine and David. Their scenes don't feel driven by performance or manipulation. They feel grounded in ordinary emotional presence, and after years of chaos within the Brown family, that ordinary presence feels almost revolutionary. The biggest irony of all may be this. The show that spent over a decade defending plural marriage ultimately produced its strongest emotional argument against it without even realizing it. Because at the end of everything, viewers weren't most affected by the scenes involving 4 wives sharing one husband. They were affected by the simple image of one man sitting quietly beside one woman, listening carefully while she explained the pain she carried for years, and loving her without asking her to compete for emotional space ever again.